Okay, welcome and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jenny Peterson, and I am the Director of Regional Alumni Programs at New York University. On behalf of the NYU alumni team, I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Climate Solutions, a conversation with 21 Acres Center for Local Food and Sustainable Living, presented by the NYU Alumni Association and 21 Acres. Before we begin, I hope you know that all of us at NYU are thinking of you and your families during these unprecedented times. In light of the current global crisis, we have moved all of our programming online, and we're thankful that you have joined us to continue learning from the collective knowledge of our NYU community. The NYU Alumni Association represents nearly 600,000 alumni all over the world. We host almost 700 events annually to connect you with your local alumni community and with NYU. So be sure to check the alumni website and our social media platforms to keep up to date with all of our events and programs. Today, we are so excited to welcome Barry Febos, Energy Manager and Educator from 21 Acres. The 21 Acres Center for Local Food and Sustainable Living is a leader in sustainable and regenerative practices, serving as a living laboratory center and community hub in support of sustainable farming and green building as climate solutions. 21 Acres is all about education and inspiration, sharing ideas, providing resources, and creating opportunities for engagement, whether it be on their beautiful campus and farm in Seattle, Washington, which I have had the great pleasure of visiting, or through their many virtual channels. So we're fortunate to learn from Barry today and very grateful that he has taken the time to join us. If you have any questions during this session, just pop them into the Q&A box and we will get to as many as we can at the conclusion of the program. All right, so thank you everyone again for joining us. And Barry, to get us started, can you share just a little bit about your role at 21 Acres as an energy manager and educator and about the organization itself?
Sure. Thanks so much, Jenny. Thanks everyone for being here. It's really great to be able to share about our work with such a great audience. And I'm just going to pull up a slideshow here with some images so you can kind of see what I'm talking about while I'm talking about it. Just give me a minute. Okay. So yeah, we are the 21 Acres Center for Local Food and Sustainable Living. And I've kind of highlighted these two sides of our work here. You see on the left, there's our farm. On the right is our LEED Platinum building. Yeah, our goal is basically to talk about these things as climate solutions and to kind of highlight the fact that if we are growing our food in ways that are increasing soil health and building carbon in the soil, we can actually pull carbon out of the atmosphere. And if we're managing our buildings and our energy use in ways that reduce or eliminate emissions, we can create a sustainable system. So trying to kind of model this sustainable system here on site the best we can. And my role, so I'll show you a few pictures of the farm to get started here. But this is our farm this past season. We grow produce out on the farm, so it's partially demonstration. And that produce is also sold in our market, but not in ways that compete with other farms that we sell. Because our goal is to support regenerative agriculture and local producers, local food systems. So we don't want to compete, but show people those possibilities. We also do a lot of farm education. So pre-COVID, we have big groups of volunteers coming out, learning about regenerative practices and sustainable agriculture. We still have limited groups coming out with social distancing. And a lot of what we're doing now is kind of virtual learning and creating resources that we can share over the internet and being able to talk to groups like you who are all over the place, which is amazing. So spreading the message more widely. This is a picture from our farmers market. You can see a lot of produce here being sold. and our education kitchen. We do cooking classes focused on local food, more of the kitchen. And then back to the building here, which is kind of more of my purview of my role is related to sustainable technology management and education. And I've worn many hats on the facilities team, from maintaining systems and kind of being an interim facilities manager. But my role primarily now is focusing on using our building and farm and sustainable systems as teaching tools for community members and students and building professionals who are interested in these technologies, and to demonstrate an integrated approach that we need to solve climate change, which is not just one solution, not just green building, but also looking at agriculture and that kind of full system. And our building has a lot of different integrated systems as well, just within the building itself. So yeah, that's kind of a summary of my role. Another couple pictures from the building tour and a course presentation we did with some building professionals last year. So
It's
yeah.
incredible. And we're so lucky to have a resource in the Pacific Northwest for that sort of hands-on experiential learning. I think that's such a wonderful asset for the community. The past couple of months, certainly we have seen the impacts of climate change, whether you're on the East Coast dealing with hurricanes, or for those of us who live on the West Coast, myself included, this summer was horrible in terms of wildfires and smoke. So I'm curious, what have the last couple of months been like for you? And can you speak a little bit to the wildfires on the West Coast and what that experience was?
For sure. I have this satellite photo, which gives kind of a stark reality that reminded us all of. And you can see Seattle here, but these are not clouds, that's all smoke. So pretty much the whole western side of the US is covered in smoke. And in terms of my personal experience, and I know a lot of everyone that I was talking to, we're not only dealing with COVID, but then all of a sudden the one outlet that we have to kind of get moving and get exercise and get out and about on a daily basis by going for walks outside is then gone. So we're just kind of stuck in the house and doing the best we can to kind of stay healthy. But it's just, a stark reminder of the impacts of climate change. We've seen, wildfires getting worse and worse each year. Ebbs and flows a little bit. This year was pretty much completely unprecedented, but we've definitely seen that trend, and climate change impacts it for sure. And I wanted to kind of show the next slide, which relates to spring flooding and summer drought. So the way that climate change relates to fires, in my mind, is that essentially when the climate is warmer, it's holding more water in the atmosphere. And so in a place like Washington, where we kind of have these seasonal fluctuations, in the summer it tends to be pretty dry, which you might not be aware if you're not from Seattle. But the rest of the year, it's pretty rainy, which is what you might know more about or be more familiar with, the rainy city. But now it's become like the summer, there's almost an extended drought throughout the whole summer, or it's very rare that we get rain, which creates problems on farms. And then in the wintertime, when we normally get kind of, slow trickle of rain throughout the entire thing, was more what we used to experience. Now we're getting these really extreme rain events because the water is kind of staying up there in the atmosphere and then all coming down at once. So that's kind of the connection in my mind between the two. But there are, in an adaptive way. So there's ways of, trying to avoid climate change or offset it, which is obviously the main goal, but also adapting, because we are experiencing the effects of climate change, as this kind of illustrates, is important. And regenerative agricultural practices can help in both of these ways. So on a more immediate level, just adapting to flooding and drought when you have more healthy farm soils, so you're kind of building carbon into the soil, lots of healthy organic matter through a variety of practices that we'll get into a little more later. You can actually hold more water in the soil, so the farm can actually absorb more water. And if you're doing things like keeping the wetlands, surrounding a farm healthy, or local wetlands and other natural environments, you can also kind of let that water go to where it more naturally would. And of course, if you have a really extreme event, it's hard to avoid, but these things can help. And then on a more macro level, when you have healthy soils, and if you're doing it on a larger scale, or you have many farms that are doing these practices, it can actually increase rainfall in like a microclimate way, which is pretty magical. And then overall, pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere will help sort of reduce those impacts of climate change for the long term. But in terms of our experience, which is the question was more about, sorry, I skipped ahead there. This is a picture. This is a picture of the farm during smoke, and it looks like kind of a beautiful sunset, but it's not sunset. This is just like the middle of the afternoon, and the sun is just behind a cloud of haze. So kind of see what's happening there. And this is a more comical image here on the right. Some of our farm team lounging in respirators, because that's kind of what's required if you're working out in the smoke. And on the left, Dr. Sarah Sue Myers, who's a naturopath who's done a lot of herbal education for us. So she did these herbal walks around the farm, teaching people about natural medicine. She wrote a blog for us about staying healthy during smoke, because not only she is a naturopath, but she's also worked as a wilderness firefighter in her early days. So she has a lot of firsthand experience with that. And that blog really helped me out when I was kind of stuck in the house being like, how good is the air quality in here? I'm not totally sure. I did learn a lot about a lot of air quality maps and resources during that time. But just simple things like staying really hydrated, drinking a ton of water, taking electrolytes, and just resting, not overdoing it. Really important stuff. And there's a link to the blog there if you want to go back in the recording and check that out. Worth reading. And then another anecdote related to this on our farm. This is a number of our staff posed in front of our dry farm tomatoes. And dry farm tomatoes are really delicious tomatoes that are grown without being irrigated throughout the whole season. So you plant them when the ground is still moist, and the roots kind of follow the water down as the water table recedes throughout the season. So it's kind of an adaptive strategy for growing tomatoes in a dry climate. And a cool thing, but there's sort of a sad, kind of a devastating story attached to it, because the day after we did this staff education about dry farm tomatoes, or a couple days later, two of the farms that kind of started this practice, Molino Creek and Two Dog Farm in California near Santa Cruz, had fires ripped through their area, were actually destroyed. So just a stark reminder of fires and the impacts they can have with climate change. And the signs that folks are holding up in this picture relate to farm workers and trying to kind of support frontline communities during COVID and with the smoke. And there's another blog that one of our co-directors, Robin, wrote about wildfires and climate change, which has a lot of great resources as well. And this to me highlights the importance, here we go, of paying attention to vulnerable communities and thinking about climate change not just as an environmental issue, which it certainly is, but also as a social justice issue. And the fact that typically those who are least responsible for climate change and have the fewest resources to address it are the ones who are dealing with the first and worst impacts of it. And so an important thing to keep in mind, but also a great opportunity to improve the environment as well. as the lives of folks who don't have resources, and to work towards a more equitable future. So I highlighted a few links here, some national resources. The NAACP has some good environmental justice resources that also relate to climate justice. The Climate Justice Alliance, and then article on green building as a civil rights issue, which I thought was really interesting. And then a few local links for those who are in our region. Front and Centered is a really great organization that does this work in Washington State, and Puget Sound Sage does a lot of great work more locally in Seattle. So thank you.
Powerful resources, and we'll find a way to get all of these links to everybody after the session in a digest, so that if there are particular articles or organizations that attendees want to get involved with, we certainly want to make that possible. I do think for those of us who have experienced some of the wildfires this summer, it's such a reminder of how urgent this issue is. And I'm curious, for you as someone who really spends a lot of time thinking about this day in and day out, what gives you hope in the face of all of these challenges? And are there strategies that we can look to try and fight the climate crisis today?
Of course, totally. And that's, I mean, that's what keeps me going and what motivates my work and all the work that we're doing at 21 Acres. So I know that that last question leads to a lot of kind of stark reminders and things that can feel like downers. And a lot of the talk about climate change is that way and can be a little disheartening, but don't lose hope. Got to stay inspired. That was really driven home to me when I'm going to go to this next slide here. I watched a presentation by Drawdown, which is a really great organization, drawdown.org. They've presented kind of the first comprehensive plan for how to address climate change. And it is truly comprehensive. They've got a lot of amazing solutions, and they kind of break it down by like how much impact based on scientific studies, many different peer-reviewed studies. Each practice that you do can make an impact. And this is kind of an outline of those things. And to me, kind of highlights some of the reason that we're focusing in the areas that we are at 21 Acres. So you can see at the top here is the sources of climate change. So the first climate solutions, the first step is reduce the sources of climate pollution. So it's electricity. And a lot of this is actually going to buildings. So the way they have it written out, buildings look relatively small over here. I mean, they're still pretty massive, but it's only accounting for the actual construction process, not for the usage of buildings. So the energy usage, when you add that, buildings account for about 40% of global carbon emissions. So that's part of why we're focused on buildings. And then food and agriculture are a source as well. So food waste, as well as all the fossil fuel inputs that kind of go into farms. So not only through food transport, but petroleum-based fertilizers and pesticides also are utilizing fossil fuels. And then a lot of it is also from animal confinement and those kinds of things. So methane coming from cows. But the most exciting aspect, I think, of agriculture and the solution aspect is the second step here, beyond reducing sources, is to support carbon sinks. So we can, even if we eliminated all of our climate emissions today, we would still be dealing with climate change for a while, because the carbon that's in the atmosphere will stay there for a long time. So we need to find ways to pull it out. And that's why regenerative practices in agriculture are so exciting, because they can actually do that for us. And that's why this land sinks and shift to agricultural practices here is such a huge part of the supporting sinks. It's like the main thing down here, and why we're focused on it. So yeah, there's a lot of exciting things there. That's kind of an overview from Drawdown. I have another one of their slides which shows the sources. So these are all the things contributing to climate change. This is all the CO2 that's in the atmosphere. This is what the carbon sinks that we currently have going are doing, how much carbon they're pulling out from the system. And this 60% is what we need to make up now by increasing land sinks and then reducing these sources as well. So that's kind of an overview.
Incredibly helpful for those of us who are visual learners. I think it's a nice way to see it laid out, and makes a lot of sense.
Totally. Yeah. And this was really great for me as well. I remember when I first started engaging in climate activism and learning about climate change, getting more motivated when like An Inconvenient Truth came out. I really was like hungry for this kind of resource reviews, like how much, where is it all coming from, and like what solutions are doing what. And Drawdown, I think, has really provided a great resource there, and illustrated a lot of why we're focusing where we're focusing at 21 acres.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I just wanted to give a couple of examples from our building, which is more where I'm focused at 21 acres. And so a lot of when I think about green building and climate solutions, it's working with natural systems instead of trying to work against them. So when you're working against it, you have to use a lot of energy, and that energy often comes from fossil fuel sources and contributes to climate change. But if you work with a natural system, you're not fighting as much and you don't have to use as much energy. So I wanted to use a couple examples of ways that we kind of work with natural systems in the building to reduce our energy use. So the first one here is passive solar orientation. So if you have this is something people have been doing for thousands of years. The Greeks did it, and you orient your building south, you get a lot of that incoming light and heat in the summertime. And this slide kind of illustrates this a little more clearly. You can ignore some of these terms over here. The main thing is check out the sun over here. So in the winter time, which we're moving into now, you get lots of sun coming in these south-facing windows, and all that heat is hitting the floor and being absorbed. So you can kind of passively heat your building that way. And then if you design your roof overhang, which we've done at 21 acres, so that it's long enough, when the summer sun is higher in the sky around noontime, it's blocked by this. So you're not getting that heat when you don't want it in the building. So it's just kind of a smart, very simple way of working with the sun, getting energy into the building in the wintertime when you want it, and keeping it out in the summer when you don't want it. And yeah, so that's kind of like a nice illustration of that, working with natural systems. And another way that we do this is with our geothermal system. So you can see in this picture, part of our building is kind of sheltered behind this earth berm, or what I'm calling an earth sheltered design. And the ground, this is another technically a passive solar strategy, but really it's just using the earth. But because the earth has the sun radiating on it all day, it maintains this really consistent temperature around 55 degrees. In the wintertime, that's substantially warmer than the air if you're in a cold climate or temperate climate. And then in the summertime, that's substantially cooler. So you can kind of make use of that. And if you think about, where do animals go in the wintertime when it's cold? A lot of animals burrow into the ground because it really does stay warm. So following nature. And our heating system does this as well in a slightly more complicated way, but it's a geothermal system. So we have all of these pipes buried underground with heat transfer fluid circulating through it, going into our heating system, and then preheating the water. So you can see these like little temperature arrows. And then that gets distributed through our heat distribution system. So in our building, it's radiant floors. So we're kind of taking heat from underground coils and transferring it into coils under our feet in the building. So I think that's a cool illustration of that. And because the fluid circulates through there repeatedly over and over again, even though 55 degrees doesn't sound that warm, even if it picks up a few degrees or even half a degree each time it circulates through, that adds up over time, and means that this heating system can actually, for every unit of electrical energy that we put into it, because it's an electrical system, the heat pump itself kind of works like a backwards air conditioner. So if you ever touch the back side of an AC unit, it's really hot. We're capturing that heat, and we're adding heat from the earth to that to make it more efficient. But the point is that for every unit of energy that you put into it, you can actually get 3 units out, which is kind of magical. So with a conventional, combustion appliance, you usually never get even 1 unit out for each unit you put in. You're getting like 0.9 units out for every unit of energy you put in. But with this, you can actually get 3 times or more the amount of energy that you're putting into it out in heating value, which is really great and leads to a lot of energy savings. And this is a illustration of how our heating system goes into the hillside here at 21 acres. So we have, this is our heat pump here. And then, can you see my mouse on the presentation?
I can't see your mouse.
Oh, okay, sorry. Well, in the middle, there's a box and then some pipes going to it. And then there's coiled pipes underground, which is an illustration of how it works. And then this is an image of where the pipes are buried in the front lawn, so you can kind of see it a little more clearly. Yeah,
So neat. It really speaks to the intentionality around the design of the building and just how much thought goes into all of these different elements to make it as sustainable as possible.
Totally. Yeah, so there's a number of ways. This is the radiant floors before they poured concrete on them, so you can see the tubes buried underneath. And then, yeah, I wanted to kind of make a list of take-home climate solutions that people could, ways that you can engage at home, even if you don't have these kind of examples that I'm showing here. There's great ways that anyone could get involved. So I think great way to start is just to connect with a local climate group in your area. 350.org and Climate Reality Project have a lot of local chapters throughout the country. And there's this really great website called Climate Crisis Policy, which is essentially a comprehensive website of all the different policy proposals that are on the table related to climate change right now. A lot of things related to like a Green New Deal that could be put together to create really great legislation and things that you can support. So that's a great resource. And then things that you can do at home, just contact your local utility and find out about free resources or low-cost resources that might be available. A lot of utilities offer free or low-cost services to help you make your home more energy efficient, which not only saves energy, but can save on your bills as well. So getting energy audits or converting to LEDs, getting rebates for more efficient appliances, things that are rated through Energy Star rated, things use a lot less energy. And then you can also purchase renewable energy through your utility, which not everyone is aware of. Most utilities offer the option to enroll in like a green power program like PSE has here in the Pacific Northwest. Seattle City Light already has a carbon neutral electrical grid, which is amazing. But they also offer the option to support renewable energy through their utility programs. And then heat pumps. So even if you can't afford a ground source heat pump, they're kind of expensive to install, although there's a lot of more affordable options as the technology evolves for making those geothermal wells and financing, so you don't have to pay a huge upfront cost, but you can still have a system. But you might have heard of air source heat pumps or like a mini split, which is a lot more common. It's just you'd probably see them outside a lot of houses. It looks just like an air conditioning unit that's not attached to the house, but has a couple of pipes going in. So it's more efficient than an air conditioner, works in a similar way, and you can actually do heating with it as well. So if you're considering upgrading or replacing your heating system, that's definitely worth considering. Considering an electric vehicle for your new car, supporting a renewable grid. So yeah, those are great things as well. I also wanted to mention we're in the middle of working on a electric refrigerated box truck made with 3 Tesla batteries. So that's a super exciting upcoming thing. If you are local to the area and you want to get some experience, have a little bit of background in doing electrical stuff, definitely reach out to me. We're looking for some volunteers to help the mastermind of that project, who builds electric race vehicles, but that's a cool project. And then, yeah, look into solar for your home. If you own your home, there's ways you can install it without even paying upfront costs through third-party sales, if that's something that's available in your state. And then reducing food waste is actually the #1 climate solution on Drawdown's list right now for 2020, which is, yeah. But, I think around 30% of food winds up going to waste in the world, which is a total bummer. And if we can, all the energy inputs that go into producing that food, if we eliminate that waste, those energy inputs are also eliminated. So anything you can do to reduce food waste, either by composting at home or supporting a local compost service, are great. And then for anything you can't reduce, there's also, if you can afford, there's carbon offsets, which you can buy to support folks who already have shovel-ready climate solutions and are looking for funding. And then I put a couple of energy efficiency resources that are kind of national down here. So that's my long-winded list.
No, it's incredibly
yeah.
helpful. I think what everybody comes to this, crisis with is the question, how can I help? And you've given us 7 ways here, regardless of where you live, that you can think about making an impact in your own life. And it's good to know, I think, in particular, that food waste can be so impactful, because I think sometimes people wonder, well, I'm just one person or we're just one family. How much is our home compost really going to do? But if all of us cumulatively come together on that, it sounds like we can make a real impact.
Yeah, definitely. And especially also advocating at, your local grocery store or restaurants, trying to help others who maybe produce more food waste, reduce that waste as well is a big impact. And supporting
Carbon
legislation.
offsets might be a nice holiday gift, a nice,
Yeah,
meaningful gift for a loved one. Why not?
I've given it
Oh,
before.
yeah, I would love to gift one. I think that's a great idea. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah,
Um, I wonder, I know something that you've spoken about in the past and that I've read about with 21 Acres, which is so fascinating to me, is this concept of regenerative agriculture. It's something that was new to me, honestly, before hearing about it through you all and the work that you do at the organization. So I'm curious if you could share with us just a little bit more about that concept and what it means.
totally. So this is a good kind of illustration of the basics of how regenerative agriculture works. So in terms of carbon, which is a lot of our focus, or sometimes people call it carbon farming when you're focused on the building carbon in the soil. But the way that plants make this happen is through photosynthesis, which I'm sure you've all heard about. But solar energy goes into the plant absorbs CO2 from the air, and water and the soil. It builds carbohydrates, which it then puts into the soil and builds biomass. So it's kind of taking carbon out of the air and turning it into plant matter, and all the root growth that's happening underground and the interaction with the soil microorganisms allows the carbon to be held in the soil. So if you think about it in the simple term, the plant is taking CO2 from the atmosphere and growing its roots. And then those roots are eventually kind of breaking down and being stored in the soil as carbon. So carbon storage in the soil. But it's more complicated than that, and it's not just roots. But I'm not a chemist, I'm not a biochemist, so I can't completely speak to that. But
Yeah,
this
that's
diagram,
fair.
I think, this diagram gives a pretty good explanation of how that process works. And so regenerative practices are things that you can do to kind of increase this effect. And a lot of the ways that it's done on larger farms are through so eliminating tilling. So if you can avoid leaving the ground bare for any amount of time, that obviously will the carbon that is stored in the soil, if it gets completely dried out and those microorganisms die, eventually winds up making its way back into the atmosphere. So the more you can keep it covered and keep that kind of microorganism ecosystem in the soil happy, the more carbon you're going to be able to store and the longer you're going to be able to store it for. And so one of the ways that we do that at 21 acres, and a lot of people do it, is by planting cover crops. So this is a picture of Aaron, who works on the farm here, looking at some of the, I think it's a winter rye, but it might be a mix. But depending on the soil chemistry needs of your fields, you plant cover crops. So you're always keeping something green on the field, even after you harvest. And then depending, you can select your cover crops so that they actually, in addition to helping to build organic matter and carbon in the soil, they can add nutrients that your soil needs. So if you're getting soil tests, you can figure out, oh, like we're, a little bit deficient in this nutrient, and this cover crop provides it. So it's pretty amazing what plants can do just by getting a little sun and a little water and interacting with the organisms in the soil. So kind of paying close attention to those ecosystems within the farm and then beyond the farm. So our approach at 21 acres, we do regenerative practices, but the kind of overarching perspective that we try to take is agroecology. And that's looking at a farm as part of a more broad ecosystem. So that's a big part of why we also do restoration work. Landscape restoration is a big part of what we do as well. We have a native plant nursery, and Jess on our team does a lot of amazing work to kind of make all that stuff happen, work with a lot of volunteers. So if you keep those neighboring ecosystems healthy, it keeps the farm healthier, brings in beneficial insects and animals, and manages water, like with the wetland, kind of supporting, keeping the water out of the fields when we don't want it there, as I was talking about earlier. So all of these things, and there's a lot of other practices that will help with this, but a lot of them are, reducing tillage, planting cover crops, and then also integrating animals, bringing animals back into the farm fields and the vegetable production areas to help, add nutrients, pooping on the fields, but also to allow them to graze, and their hooves actually help to aerate the soil and minimize the kind of animal confinement situations that are creating a lot of the methane and the negative impacts from agriculture. So that's my brief overview.
Amazing. I always take so many pieces of knowledge from these conversations, and animal hooves aerating the soil is something I would have never considered. So it's interesting to think about and neat to see the cover crops in action. I appreciate you bringing all of these photos and graphs to share with us. I think that's a really helpful way to think about some of these concepts in practice.
For sure. And I also made some climate solution list related to local food and regenerative agriculture.
I love that.
I'll
Yeah, I
share
think,
here.
everybody's hoping to support farmers in their local communities. So any resources that you have and would be willing to share about how we can get involved would be so welcome.
Definitely. Yeah, and there's a lot of ways. I mean, we have a great page on our website. If you want to check it out, if you go to 21 acres, get involved, and then look for resources to support local farmers. There's a great list there. And some of the things it mentions I've also listed here, but just a really direct one is to join a CSA, which stands for Community Supported Agriculture. I'm sure many of you have heard of, but you pay certain amount of money at the beginning of a farm season, and then you get a weekly share of produce, a box from the farm. And that helps farmers be able to just be a lot more stable because they get that income right at the beginning of the season and can ensure that things keep moving along. And localharvest.org is a great national website which lists farms that provide CSAs, farmers markets, and then other ag, like small farm related organizations nationally. And then there's more local organizations like the Tilth Alliance here in the Seattle area. We have links to their website if you go to our resources to support local farmers page. We also have the staff recommended organizations document. But one I wanted to point out for anyone who's listening in from New York, since we're talking to NYU alum, Stone Barns in the Hudson Valley is a really great organization that's working on a lot of the same things that we are in a really great way. I had a friend who worked there after college, after undergrad, and I got to tour around. I was very, their sheepdog was a little bit scary, but it was a
Oh,
real
I
working
love
sheepdog.
them. Yeah, no, they're
So,
beautiful.
yeah. And so it's, keeping the predators away. The Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania is a really great organization as well. It does a lot of great research related to these things. And yeah, the American Farmland Trust has a donation page which goes directly to farmers struggling during COVID, which has definitely impacted farmers and farm workers. And then right now you can watch Kiss the Ground on Netflix if you want like a great explanation of regenerative agriculture and its benefits as a climate solution. They're an organization based in LA that supports regenerative practices, but they have this film that's out on Netflix right now, narrated by Woody Harrelson, so you can check that out. And then there's always offsets, and there's ones that are specifically targeted at regenerative agriculture, which you can get through nori.com or Native Energy and other places. Thank you.
This is about as many resources as I think we've ever provided in a single hour. So this is fantastic. I can think of 3 or 4 for myself that I'm ashamed I'm not already doing. So this has been really helpful.
No shame.
And I know that we've got
shame is not allowed.
Exactly. We're hope. Yeah. When Barry and I first started speaking about this conversation, he reminded me that there's a lot of reasons to be hopeful, which I think is something we could all use. So a lot that we can do to make a difference, which is, I think, the key takeaway. We do have some questions. So I think we've got a couple of minutes and would love to share them with you. The first, and I know you've probably covered this already in terms of the CSA, reaching out to your local utility, composting, but we had somebody ask, are there any specific tips for apartment dwellers to be more sustainable?
Totally. Yeah, and that's something I wanted to hit on better with my list, so I appreciate the question. In terms of composting, there are worm bins or something that you can do in apartments if you're interested in that, but also like I said, advocating for if you're in a city that doesn't have a composting program, trying to advocate for that, or get involved in a community garden. There's also, if you have any access to the outdoors in your apartment building, if there's like a rooftop or you have a balcony, you can do planters for gardening that way. And then also utility programs will often also provide resources for renters. So it's still worth looking into that and seeing what incentives there might be to change light bulbs or get rebates on appliances, or work with your landlord if they're willing to do something along those lines. And there's, depending on what your climate is, there's, weatherization things you can do, trying to make sure that you don't have any leaky windows or doors, doing some weather stripping or putting up plastic and things like that. But yeah, I'm happy also if people have specific questions. My contact is at the end of the presentation here, and you're welcome to reach me directly.
Thank you. Very generous. Arthur asked, where does deforestation for animal feed fit into this picture?
That's a great question, and that's a huge part of the agricultural impacts. So if we go back to the drawdown slides, reduce sources and this food agriculture land use. A lot of this is coming from slash and burn practices in rainforested areas where they're doing that to have land for cattle, basically. So shifting land use, that fits into this sources category here.
And Arthur also shared that it looks like Ethos Farm in New Jersey, run by Dr. Ron Weiss, is also doing some work in regenerative agriculture, maybe with prairie grasses. So for those of you who are in New Jersey, that might be a great one to check out. I don't know, are you familiar with them, Barry?
I'm actually not, so I really appreciate the lead on that.
Yeah.
I've talked to some folks who worked with prairie grasses in Kansas and are doing some amazing work with that there. But I didn't know it was happening in New Jersey. That's great.
Let's see. Christina asked, how can we encourage tax credits for geothermal? She had a house 12 years ago with passive solar, a solar water heater, and geothermal, which worked beautifully. She had tax credits then, and it sounds like those no longer apply. So I think this is a little bit more on the advocacy front.
Totally. Yeah, and again, that the website that I shared, oops, get down there. climatecrisispolicy.org. There's a lot of, I think also 350 Seattle, I know, has a list of, what's it called? Basically a list of policies that are currently proposed. And one of them is to continue the solar incentives. And I believe also geothermal is tagged onto that, so that we get back up to the 30% tax credit that you can get for installing these systems on your home. And these are proposals that have been passed in the House or proposed in the House. Obviously would need to be able to get through the Senate and all that, but if you reach out to your local representatives, yeah, those are great things to advocate for.
Yeah, researching your local legislation, I think that makes good sense. And then our last question, Barbara asks, can you speak a little bit, for those who aren't familiar, about what carbon offsets are?
Yes. So I actually have a blog, which I should have put a link to in this presentation, that I wrote about local carbon offsets. But if you go to the 21 Acres blog page, you will find that there and you get a little more detail. But just to summarize, so everybody's carbon footprint is basically the amount of emissions that you produce based on the energy usage that you use from fossil fuels. So if you're driving your car, it's like a simple example, those emissions coming out the tailpipe are going into the atmosphere. And carbon offsets are something that you can purchase to kind of offset the emissions that you're producing that you haven't been able to reduce in your own life. So an organization like a regenerative farm, for example, might be able to prove that through their regenerative practices, they're able to sequester this amount of carbon into their farm fields. And so you can actually purchase a portion of that carbon that's being sequestered into their fields, and it pays them to continue their regenerative practices or to do that additional regenerative practice and sequester that carbon for you. And it's not, reducing your impact and advocating for policy change is always the best thing to do first. But right now there's a lot of shovel-ready projects out there that need support. So buying carbon offsets is a great way if you don't have the time, but you do have the resources for that.
Very helpful. I have to say, this is one of my favorite conversations to date, Barry. So thank you for joining us. And as someone who lives in Seattle, I'm just so proud that we have 21 Acres in our backyard as an organization that's working so hard on the climate solution and giving us opportunities to be part of that process.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. And it's great talking to you all. And again, feel free to reach out if you're looking for more ideas or want to partner on making some educational work together.
Yeah, and I should mention that you all also offer virtual learning programs, everything from, I think I saw fermentation, it just really, as well as the virtual tour of the center itself. So if folks are interested, we will certainly be in touch. And let me put up, we actually did create a slide with 21 Acres website. So let me put that up for everybody, as well as their social media handles. We have recorded this webinar, so we will be posting it online with closed captioning in the next couple of days. So certainly stay connected with us and with 21 Acres on our websites and our social media platforms. We really thank you all for taking the time to join us. We're excited to share these resources with you who participated via email in the next couple of days, and certainly be in touch with us directly if you have any questions.
Everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.